Welcome, welcome to triple take cinema. My name is Kyle Brown. I'm here with Alex and Dustin, my co-hosts in crime and in watching movies. We have decided to eschew our manliness and talk about 3 movies about women, made by women, for women, but also for everyone, because they are fantastic and at the very least thought-provoking. So, the 3 movies we are watching this episode, frankly, we've watched them already, spoiler alert, is Little Women by Greta Gerwig, Promising Young Woman by Emerald Fennell, and Booksmart by Olivia Wilde. How you doing, gentlemen?
Doing well.
Looking
Let's
forward to
see.
talking about these movies. I have some thoughts about all 3. They may be a little bit spicier for Promising Young Women, but we will certainly get into it.
Ooh, we are a pro-spice podcast here on Triple Take Cinema. Ideally 3 hot peppers, just to keep it on brand as much as possible. So I'll give my little history with these movies. I had seen Booksmart many times. I love Booksmart. I have seen Promising Young Woman, but I had not seen it in quite some time. I watched it when it came out during the pandemic, and then had not for a while. And then I had never seen Little Women by Greta Gerwig, but I have celebrated a lot of Greta's catalog, despite not being a huge Barbie fan. And so I really wanted to see what it was all about. It did get some rave reviews and all those things. So yeah, and I watched them in this order: Little Women, Promising Young Woman, and then Booksmart at the end.
Had you
Let's
seen any other adaptations of Little Women?
No, Little Women is one of
Okay.
those things. It's little. This is another reason I wanted to watch it, is because Little Women is one of those things. Because I mean, I grew up in a house with 2 older sisters, and it's something that I've heard of for literally my entire life, and
Mhm.
never once engaged with. Never once was, I mean, it's not titled for something that a young boy of a certain age would be interested in. And then maybe by the time they are interested in the title, they're like, well, I don't know if that's my bag. So, so it was just one of those things where I was like, well, it's Greta. And so I really wanted to just keep doing that and give. I find her to be at the very least, a thought provoking filmmaker and someone that makes movies that I want to talk about. I watched it with my wife, who's read the books and seen many adaptations, so she, had a lot of feelings and a lot of thoughts, mostly related to its differences between that and the book, which I was blissfully ignorant of. Um, and so, yeah, I not. Had you guys read the book or done any of that? Or seen any adaptations?
I had seen the 1994 version.
Oh,
Oh God, this was probably like in 2019. I was as well as you, like blissfully unaware, not blissfully, just unaware of. I had heard of it, but had no interest in it. And when my wife and I started dating, a local art house cinema had a screening of it. I mean, it's a local movie theater had a screening of it, and she was insistent on going because she loves the '94 version. And it's kind of, this was like 5 years ago now, and it's kind of become like an ongoing joke that my response coming out of it was, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Or no, not as bad. It was better than I thought it was going to be. It was my review of it. Like, I thought it was fine. It was enjoyable enough. But yeah, that was my only real familiarity with Little Woman, was seeing that version once. I had never watched Promising Young Woman, and I saw Booksmart in the theaters when it released, but that was it. I hadn't watched it since. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, this was my first exposure to Little Women in any format. Um, but it's definitely a movie I have a lot of nostalgia for. We've talked before about movies getting the theater bump, where you kind of have a richer experience if you see it on the big screen. And this one definitely gets the nostalgia bump because it's just a part of my story now, where I saw it on a second date with my wife, and I picked it having no familiarity with the story, but had liked Greta Gerwig's other stuff and was pretty blown away. I'm gonna get hyperbolic as we talk about this movie, but I think it's probably one of my favorite films of the 2010s. Um, So it was really nice watching this maybe for the third time for this podcast. And Promising Young Women was also a COVID watch for me. I remember enjoying the technical craftsmanship, but being slightly annoyed by some of its choices. Feelings which were compounded on my second watch. And Booksmart, I saw probably a couple of years ago. Really enjoyed the first time and really enjoyed the second time. Excited to talk about all three of these.
Okay, so you had all three previewed. Interesting. I don't know that I knew that going into this, but cool.
Yeah, I didn't
Cool.
either. That's interesting though, but that's good. I like the personal narrative you have. Well, you've already said something very spicy as far as I'm concerned. So we can get right into it. You guys, so do you guys? Let's just start with Little Women then. I'm curious because I want to hear Alex's take on Little Women. I
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
let's fire it off, dude.
Let's do it. Alex just
Yeah.
like, I love it. It's the best thing ever, and I'm
Yeah,
never gonna watch another movie again.
I've never actually seen it because I was just making out with my wife, but that's neither here nor there.
So I am a sucker for any film that feels literary and like has novels as part of its plot structure. I think it's why I like The Royal Tenenbaums as much as I do, because it has that kind of framing device. And here I was definitely drawn in by that, you know, framing device of Joe writing and selling her book to the publisher in that first scene. Um, and I just love the autumn in New England's, I guess different seasons, but um, just the setting resonates. I think all the characters are wonderful and like really richly written. Uh, I don't think there's a bad performance in the bunch, although Emma Watson is definitely the weakest link of the main cast. Um,
I feel
I
like she's kind of. I mean, her character is kind of not. I say this. She's not given much to do, and that's not even so much that like her narrative is like the most traditional of them all, but just like they don't really spend much time with her. She doesn't really have much opportunity to do anything on screen.
No, that's true. Meg is probably like the thinnest character. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, I love the cross cutting between different time periods. I just love the look and feel of it. It's such a, and this has kind of become a cliche when talking about movies, but it's such a cozy movie. Um, and I love how the visuals really complement that, where you've got these kind of warmer, orangey tones when they're in the past, and then when they're, you know, 7 years later in the quote present of this movie, it's kind of got this bluish gray tint to it. I think the way that like immediately uh, sets you in which part of you know, the coming of age journey that we're seeing for these four women is. Um, and yeah, it gets me on an emotional level every time. Love the visuals, love the editing. Um, on a craft level, on an acting level, thematically, it checks all my boxes. So I think it's why it's a movie that I just, really, really love.
You didn't
Okay.
mention the biggest box to check that I'm assuming you're just embarrassed to like Timothy Chalamet. Like that's it. Like
I
that's for
do
you
love,
like the true best thing.
I do love
Shamalama Ding Dong.
Timothée.
Yes, he's
I
known as
do think he's
Shamalama
really
Ding
good at
Dong in my
this.
house.
No, he
He is
actually
good.
I yeah, I thought he was really good at this too.
Yeah, I like Chalamet in this. It worked for me. Joe worked for me. Emma Watson worked for me. Um, I generally speaking like Emma Watson. I do agree that her character didn't. She kind of had the most boring arc, which is kind of
Yeah.
funny because she's the one who like actually married for love and whatever. But that's a little bit of the older sibling stuff. You just like, yeah, you gotta do some boring stuff, I guess. I like the mom. Yeah, I guess. So here's my question. You said you like the editing. It was obviously a very big choice, and then I want to hear more from Dustin. It was a very big choice to edit this and edit's not the right word, to present this story in non-chronological form. Because that's not how the book goes. That's not how any of that. This is all things my wife told me. This, you know what I mean? Like, this is not how this story is generally presented. And I was, my only issue, the only thing that I kind of found distracting was how they chose to deal with the age differences in Florence Pugh's character. What's her name? I can't remember her name.
Uh,
Um,
Amy.
we,
Amy,
yes, Amy. In Amy's character, because the only way they really seem to be able to accomplish, you know, in other versions of this, so I'm told, they use a younger actor and an older actor. Um, and I guess I was sort of, there was times when her age, when they were trying so hard to tell you that she was younger, with like
Mm-hmm.
the way she spoke, the way her hair was cut, and generally speaking, like
Yep.
her physical mannerisms.
Yep.
And it was at times with the non chronological format. I mean, I could pick up that, you know, when she didn't have bangs and this and that, and she spoke this way, like it was pretty clear. But there were some times when they would harken back to the days of yesteryear when she was much younger, and it just didn't. That didn't really work for me. And I don't really. I mean, I guess the solution is to maybe have another actor to be younger, but I don't know if that was. I don't know. I think that's also hard to do in and of itself when all the other ones are not doing that. Um, but
Yeah,
that
that would
was
almost be more jarring to like have a different actor in there without doing it for the other three sisters, right? Like if you did it for
right.
all four of them, then you can kind of be like, oh, these are the old, these are the young. But if there's just like one random one that's like completely different, and then
Yeah.
everyone else is like the same, you'd be like, what? Like, did
Yeah.
she get sick? Like,
Yeah.
could she
Yeah.
not act?
Yeah. No. Yeah. I agree. So that, but I guess I wasn't sure. Okay, so I'm also going to bring up something totally non sequitur here to try to maybe illustrate a point. Have you guys read or watched any of The Stand by Stephen
I've
King?
watched. I haven't read either, but I've watched both adaptations.
So you watched the
No
original one?
familiarity.
No familiarity. Okay, well,
Mm-mm.
it's
Um,
it's a very solid book by Stephen King about a lot
End
of
of the
things,
world.
frankly. About the end of the
Yeah.
world in a lot of ways, and a sickness that kills everyone but like 1% of the population. It's a fantastic read. I highly suggest it. But they did an adaptation that was, you know, long and drawn out, and it was awesome. It had Rob Lowe and Gary Sinise.
A
But
mini series.
yes, it was a miniseries. And then they recently did like an adaptation of that on some CBS or FX or one of those things.
Paramount Plus. Yeah.
Paramount Plus, yeah. And they made this decision to just give you all the information in non chronological form. And similar to that project, I was kind of, I'm not sure, I'm not sure what was gained by that. And I'm not sure, I guess I kind of feel that the moments in this movie were a little bit, for me, were a little bit taken away from or lessened by the non chronological form because there wasn't as much build up to certain things, and it did feel like vignette in a way that, on the one hand, I kind of appreciated because there is this weird things that happens with the passing of time in a family and all the stories and all the things they kind of get this layered nostalgic. It's kind of a lot of times hard to disentangle, and when you're a lot older and you're recounting things that happened, like things are out of place in a way that is interesting when it comes to recounting your own life. But for this particular story, there was times when I was like, I don't know what was gained by showing it, giving me this information in this way. And I feel like some of the punch, like for example, the punch of when Amy destroys Joe's writing, which made me physically upset when that happened. So that was
It is
effective. But
upsetting.
like, yeah, it's very upsetting to anyone who's written anything. But I felt like that also was a little. It was difficult without a little bit before and a little bit. I mean, it was just difficult and non chronological for me at a certain point. And then also Joe and Timothy Chalamet's, what's his name? You gotta know?
Lawrence,
Laurie.
Lori.
Lawrence.
Joe and Lori's like big, are we doing this? What are we doing? I love you. That whole scene. There wasn't enough like unrequited
Yeah,
feelings, I
that
feel
build
like.
up. Yeah,
Yeah, right. It
yeah,
wasn't that for me, like that moment lost the most from the way
yeah.
that the information was presented. And it kind of feels
Even
like, yeah, the book is the
Oh,
story feels like it hinges a little bit on that moment in many ways.
even
right.
Laurie and Amy's relationship. I mean, both Laurie and Joe and Laurie and Amy. I don't want to say they feel undeveloped because like it feels genuine, like the culmination where Laurie wants to propose to Joe and she doesn't want to, but like not because she doesn't love him, kind of a thing. And when he ultimately proposes to Amy and she decides to accept it, etc., etc. Like those feel genuine, and but they don't feel necessarily earned on screen. It's like I know that there's background here and I can kind of fill in the blanks, and I'm sure there's a lot more than I saw, and I just know the pieces that I saw on screen weren't long enough or consecutive enough to really build that investment in those relationships. I don't disagree with that. I'll just say that like me literally just saying that I don't feel like those moments were long enough is kind of counterintuitive to me because my biggest gripe with this movie is I feel like it's too long. Um, I struggled to be invested in the first hour of it. I got more invested in the second hour, and that's because I think personally I find the latter half of the story, chronologically speaking, to be more interesting, especially like the efforts with Joe and publishing and things like that. Not that that's a huge piece of it, but um, I do agree with you, Kyle, like that those two relationships, but specifically Joe and Lori, and like that scene was wonderfully acted and everything, but it just didn't feel like I saw the culmination of that relationship leading up to it on screen or portrayed in a. I'm sure that the book probably covers that a lot more, being a book versus a cinematic adaptation of it.
These reactions are so fascinating to me because I had a
You
very
just love it.
very I do just love it, but specifically, we're talking about, the way it's edited, the way it's structured, the way that there's build up to certain scenes. And so with Joe and Lori, that totally worked for me because we get the reveal pretty early on in one of the more adult scenes that Joe turns Lori down.
It's like scene
And
two. Yeah.
it's like scene two, yeah. And to me, that created a lot of tension, a lot of heightened expectations, kind of waiting for that confrontation. And it gave their scenes together an air of kind of not doom and gloom, but there was a melancholy there, knowing that they don't work out as a couple. And I was really, really hooked and really gripped during that scene where they meet at the party and they dance outside, and all of their like budding friendship, budding relationship worked really well for me, having that seed planted of the outcome. um, with the Joe being an author meta narrative that kind of frames the whole story, it also works for me that we get her uh, kind of relationship with the what's
Friedrich.
his name? Friedrich. Thank you. With Friedrich at the very beginning, and that's almost like a framing device. And I think the moment where the different timelines works for me most effectively is when we get to Meg's kind of death. Spoiler for a very, very old book, old story. Um, but
Wait,
we get
Meg's or Beth's death?
Beth's death. Excuse me. Thank
Okay,
you.
I'm like, wait a
Um,
minute, I don't remember Meg dying
that
in
would
this
that would be
movie.
a very different
I was like,
movie.
what?
Sorry,
Maybe I
sorry,
didn't pay
everyone.
attention.
I killed you off screen. Um, but we get those scenes where they're almost in conversation with each other, the past and the present. Her like first getting diagnosed or getting this illness that eventually claims her life, um, and her kind of in the final days, weeks of her life, in the present time. And we get that scene of Joe walking down the steps in the past. And it's like, again, it's got that warm lighting, like, she's acting like she's going to come down and be told that her sister is dead. But you get the reverse. You get the reveal that she has, made this recovery, very uplifting. And then I think it's almost immediately after, if not the next scene, maybe a couple scenes later, we get the exact same shot composition of Joe walking down the steps. It's got that bluish gray lighting. It's got that more somber atmosphere, but the shot composition uh, is very similar, nearly identical. The performance by Saoirse Ronan is very similar, and when she gets to the bottom of the stairs and sees her mom, um, just because those scenes were so close together and in conversation with each other, I fucking lose it at that scene. It like has such a visceral impact to me that I don't think it would if that part of the story was told chronologically. Um, so I think choices like that for me like heighten things and make it just feel very interestingly layered in a way I don't think it would be if it was a straightforward chronological narrative.
That those two scenes, that juxtaposition was really like well thought out and stuff. Though my one gripe is the implication that when Beth died, that they removed her body from the room while Joe was sitting there on watch. Like, because like that I was like, wait a minute, like who came and removed like, wouldn't they make some noise? Like, they're like, how did she sleep through that? Like, that, I mean, outside the realm, like, I still thought it was a great scene and stuff, but I was a little confused there because I was like, how would you miss that if you were like that, concerned, like thinking that your sister was nearing death or whatever, that like if people came in the room and disturbed, like realized she had passed, and so they're gonna take her to the funeral home or whatever they had back then. Like, I was just a little confused as to like how they like snuck her out of there without waking Joe up at all or having giving her any inkling that something had happened. That took me out of it. That just ruined it for me.
I was just trying to keep up with how long her hair was in the timeline, and I was like, wait a second. I think there was one point where I was like, I'm just not going to think about this because it's not worth thinking about. But
Another thing that I took some degree of umbrage with in this, I knew prior to seeing it that Bob Odenkirk was the dad, and I love Bob Odenkirk, and I thought he did great, like totally great in this role. Like, he didn't really have much to do, but I was really like, I thought he had died at some point, not because of anything anybody said or anything anybody like acted or anything, but literally like when Beth died, where was he? Like, he should, or I shouldn't say when she died, because he was at the funeral. But like when she was on her deathbed, like where was he? Like, there was never any like presence of him in the house, and I thought the war was over by then. And so like he just like after he appeared in past view and then was present here and there in future view, like I was just really confused, like why is he not here sometimes? That just was kind of weird to me. And I guess like logistically speaking at the time, like who knows what he did for work, like maybe he was away on business or something like that. But I just would have like, I don't know, that was, I legit straight up thought like, oh, did he pass in the time between these two time frames that we're seeing? And then all of a sudden he was like at the funeral, and I'm like, oh, okay, he's there. And then he was officiating well, no, that was before that, in the past, that he officiated Amy's wedding. But yeah,
I,
that's another
I
thing.
also I also got the feeling that he had died, but they
Okay,
just
good. I'm
didn't
glad
address
that
it.
wasn't just me.
Yeah, yeah. No, but that they didn't address it. And I guess like for me, when he reappears, but he's not necessarily a part of Beth's life, I don't know. For me, that's just like I just chalk it up to period pieces where it's like people are just dying all the time of like
Yeah.
random stuff, and so
Yeah.
people just didn't seem to reroute their lives around death in the way that we do nowadays. In a lot of, you know what I mean? It was just like, oh,
Yeah,
they're
I
just
mean that's fair. Like I guess I just thought like maybe like the day that Beth died that maybe he would be sitting at the kitchen table with his wife. Or you know what, or something, or maybe like he was in the living room like with his head in his hands like having, and maybe he was, for all we know he was in the backyard like sobbing up against a tree. But I just thought that was a little confusing that in that, you know, however many minutes put to screen about her being on her deathbed and whatnot, that he just was like MIA from any sort of periphery that we see on camera of him just being in the background, or, you know, maybe he's in denial kind of a thing. But that's probably giving more narrative to his character than needed, really. Frankly, his character really didn't drive the narrative in any significant way.
Yeah, for me, that was not even a thought in my brain just because I was locked into Mama March and Joe, like their relationship is really core to the film, so they were the ones who I wanted to see interacting kind of at that table.
That's fair. That's fair.
yeah.
I thought you
I
were
mean,
going
I
to say
did.
because your eyes were locked into Timothy Chalamet, but okay.
That came later.
Yeah, I mean, I did it. I did overall like enjoy my watch of it, but it's not one that has stayed with me, I guess, in any way. Like some other Greta, I will say, like some other Greta Gerwig pieces have. I got a lot of Dustin. Have you seen Francis Ha?
I have not.
Okay, well, we'll add that onto the list to do at some point. But I know Alex has. For me, the editing and the pace had kind of like the whole time I was watching it, I was just thinking about the frenzied nature of Francis Ha, and it really it was one of those moments where I was like, whether I'm putting this on this movie or creating it or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But it felt very much like the fingerprints of Greta Gerwig on this. This that was like you see enough by one director, and you can and a person who's had a hand in writing stuff, and it for me it was just one of those like, oh yeah, like I can really see that this is something like this is a part of Greta Gerwig's type of movies, and I felt that way about Lady Bird as well. Just with like it's very, very, very quick moving. You know what I mean? Even though it takes place in Sacramento and almost nothing happens because it's just a end of high school for a teenager. But that kind of like I kind of appreciated that little stamp, whether yeah, just from Greta Gerwig, and I was like, oh, okay, I kind of get how she would interpret it this way. I don't really know the story. Maybe someone else does, or maybe you can pull up the Wikipedia, Dustin. But like, what's the deal with this being Sarah Polly's piece, but then she died, and then Greta Gerwig took it over? Does anyone have anything on that?
Sarah
I
Polly
feel like
didn't die.
Oh, wow.
okay, okay. Well,
Um,
we're just throwing stuff out here on triple take, seeing
yeah,
if it
no,
sticks.
Sarah Polly's still alive.
What was
But
okay? What
she,
happened then?
all I'm seeing, I mean, there's a citation to it that has more info, but in March, this was announced that a new adaptation was in process in October 2013. In March 2015, producer joined, and Sarah Polly was hired to write the script and potentially direct. And ultimately, Polly's involvement never went beyond initial discussions. So it looks like she never. March 2015, she was hired on to write the script, and potentially direct. And then August 2016 is when Gerwig came into play initially to write the screenplay, and then it wasn't for another 2 years until June 2018 that she was announced as the director. So without
This is
going
what
into like the background, it seems like just didn't pan out.
You gotta be careful who you listen to, even your wife, because my wife was just literally talking about how there was some weird thing where Sarah Polly died and Greta Gerwig took it over, and I didn't look deeper into that until this moment, and I'm glad we have done it together because that is why.
Just willfully spreading misinformation on our podcast.
Just,
Shame, sir. Shame.
just ridiculous. I mean, I'm gonna have a talk with my little woman.
Well,
It's just outrageous.
maybe to her, like she was so attached to this material that when Sarah Polly dropped out, she was dead to her.
I mean, I don't know.
It was
I'll
purely
tell you this.
euphemistic.
I will tell you this. It was a very funny viewing because we started the movie. We'll just get into it. Why not? We started the movie, and within like 3 minutes of the first scene, I had heard the most audible groans coming from her side of the couch that I had ever like. Just the most. Like I was just like, oh, and I had to stop it and be like, okay, I understand you have history
You're
with this
having
movie,
feelings
but
right
like
now.
I get it. We can talk about it all after the movie's over. It was a very funny way to watch the movie.
That's
Very
awesome.
funny way to watch the movie. Yeah, but
It's
no, I
funny.
mean, yeah.
It's funny with that because I told my wife, I'm like, I mean, I honestly don't remember the 94 version at all, beyond the fact that I said it was better than I thought it would be. Um, and that enough is to tells me that I like this version more than that version, because I actually like this quite a bit. But I told her, I'm like, I'm willing to rewatch the 94 version, but I feel like I'm still gonna like this version a lot more, just because, like, I'm sure for her the 94 one hinges on nostalgia and her being 8 years old when she first saw it, kind of a thing. And like, for me, to get me into this story, I think it being more modern in filmmaking techniques and things like that makes me feel more connected to it.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle, you were talking about like kind of auteur theory in Greta Gerwig, right? With her
Hmm.
fingerprints not being on this movie as much as some of her other work. And I think for me, it's definitely a subtler approach than in Lady Bird or Frances Ha. But we've talked about her biggest trick, which is the non chronological narrative of it. I think the faster paced editing you're talking about, for me, it came into play during those ending scenes where we've got Joe in the office of the book publisher, and she's having a conversation with her, narrating what happens, and then we're actually smash cutting to her um, in the rain with the umbrella moments. With with Friedrich, and that felt the most like, oh, she's really actively flexing those muscles that she used in those other movies. But I agree, it's you can't see the her handiwork quite as much. It's definitely a more leisurely paced movie than those other two.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is. I'm totally fine with people redoing the same stories over and over again if they find their own passion in them. I don't really have any issue with. I kind of think all stories at the end of the day are like rehashes in some sense, right? It's just some different characters, some new things, and all that. Like there's. I take no issue with a person similar to a hip hop artist, sampling a song that they love, and turning it into a new song, and kind of finding inspiration there. So I'm as happy to watch and all those things. I don't think it'll necessarily ever be one that I return to, but that's just me.
Let's move on to another one. Which one do you want to tackle next?
Ooh, I want spice. I want promising young woman. I want promising young woman because I feel like Dustin, you had not seen that.
I had not seen it.
Okay, what do you got? What was your take on Promising Young Woman before we get into Alex's spice?
Yeah, I style over substance. Like, visually, I feel like it was interesting. The performances were I don't want to say compelling to me, but they were interesting as well. Um, it just and it feels like it's like I understand like the point that it's trying to make to an extent, and I don't disagree that like like the whole rape narrative and like men get a benefit of the doubt and like, but it's so fucking literal with every single like component of that, like to a fault of, I mean, when she goes in and talks to the dean or whatever at the college, Connie Britton, um and she literally verbatim says like, oh, I have to give the guys the benefit of the doubt, innocent until proven guilty. Like, I don't agree that all that shit is bullshit. And like, I mean, I am biased as a man and like working uphill and trying to empathize with that perspective kind of a thing. But I like total trash, total horseshit. But like, I just feel like not that there could be a more tactful way to like tell a story about trying to like get revenge on that reality, but like there just could be a more interesting way kind of a thing. Like, and I just feel like, I mean, Connie Britton's a great actress and she had like nothing to work with in that scene. Alfred fucking Molina, who I fucking love, like, I just felt like the dialogue he had to work with just felt very flat and like uninspired and like didn't come off as super convincing to me. And I don't know. I'm trying to think if I've seen other movies with Carrie Mulligan in them. Like, I did not like her in this movie, and I'm struggling
Hmm.
to know if it's because uh if I like didn't like her character, or if I didn't like her as a performer or find her as a performer interesting. And I don't think I have.
Have
I've
you
seen
have you
Drive.
seen?
I haven't.
Yeah, have you seen Never Let Me Go?
No.
Have you seen Shame?
No.
Okay.
So yeah, like there's I just don't have like, this was like a bad introduction for me to her as an actress. Like Bo Burnham, I thought was good given what he had to work with. Like, played
Right.
kind of charming and like, but ultimately like kind of a dick, and not kind of a dick, like definitely a dick. And like, I appreciated that kind of reality of somebody that like comes on as like charming and that you think is like likable, and then almost maybe like has a couple opportunities to like slightly like fractionally redeem himself and like doesn't do it in any of those opportunities. Like, he to me was probably like the most interesting performance in it. But I just feel like beyond that, yeah, like it was kind of a waste of all the talent on screen between Alfred Molina and Connie Britton, and then you had Jennifer Coolidge and Clancy Brown as her parents, who were like given nothing to do. Molly Shannon as her friend's mom, like all these amazing actors and actresses that like in almost any other role they're in are doing something really cool and bringing something cool to it, and are just given like very like stereotypical, like what is like the literal definition of what this role would be, or like what this person would be in this situation, and given just a really small sandbox without any sand in it to play in, and that's it. And so yeah, I just felt like visually it was really interesting, and like kind of cool to look at some points, but that didn't carry it enough for me. And I wish there was more of a sharper narrative about this like societal issues that we deal with like rape culture and stuff like that, rather than just like being this weird kind of revenge-ish thriller.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how picante my take is going to be because I'm very much aligned with you on all that, Dustin. Uh, and I think Carey Mulligan is a great actress. I think for me the problem is that Cassie just kind of sucks as a character. I think she's really flatly written.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's for me it's a problem like, again, three dudes talking about a movie about rape culture, but to me it's really cynical and shallow to have um one of the main messages of your movie be that there is no like recovery or hope after trauma? Like trauma makes you dead inside is kind of the way
Mhm.
that I interpreted Cassie's character and Carey Mulligan's performance, where um, it almost felt like all the characters in this movie felt like they had no interiority to me. They just felt like they were kind of there to, again, like you articulated, Dustin, say the most literal version of whatever social critique that scene was making at that point, whether it was that, um, rape culture is hidden in plain sight, or um, ostensibly nice guys or men who perceive themselves as nice guys will still take advantage of women, and in this case of Cassie, in pretty grotesque ways, and then um, be pretty shocked and kind of startled when that behavior is called out, and in the case of the ending, turn very violent when that behavior is called out. Um, but yeah, Cassie as a character consistently bugged me throughout the movie because um, Carey Mulligan, again, I think does an admirable job of giving depth to that character with, she sheds tears in a couple of scenes, but it just seemed so, again, flatly written and one-dimensionally portrayed that the only texture she was given was this friendship she had with Nina in her past and in her childhood, where that was all that she had inside of her, was the complexity and depth of this friendship. And when Nina, we didn't really know the details of my reading, is that Nina commits suicide as a result of um, the 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 assault not being something that she could prosecute, and just the trauma of that. But yeah, just the whole implication that Cassie is so dead that she becomes this um, kind of vigilante figure whose sole purpose in life is to go out and prey on men in this very targeted way. um and it also feels cynical to me that the movie seems to be implying that her one hope at recovering from this trauma and finding something else inside of herself is her relationship with the Bo Burnham character. And when he's revealed to have had a role in the assaults, in the rape of Nina, um, that's when she fully commits to her revenge, you know, master plan. But yeah, shallow, cynical, very technically well done. I like a lot of the filmmaking choices here. I like the soundtrack and the editing. There's some beautiful shots. I, in particular, we're gonna get into spoiler territory, but when they're burning Cassie's body at the end, and you can kind of see her hands with her nail polish, you know, smoking among the embers of the fire. I thought, okay, that's a pretty dope image. I like what she's doing there. Um, but yeah, all style, no substance. Um, and I was looking at some other takes of the movie, and someone on Letterboxd said that it felt constructed, um, you know, to evoke think pieces rather than tell a compelling kind of nuanced story. And to me, that felt on point. Like it was really broadly gesturing at these really complicated issues, and trying to be sharp and subversive. But to me, there wasn't enough depth or nuance to, make it resonate. Kyle, what was your take on Promising
Wait, if it's okay, really quick. Like, I just want
Yeah.
to underscore something you said that I didn't even really process till you said it. But like, I think to really boil down where my dislike in this comes, and I think based on what you said, I would assume you would agree, Alex, is like how antithetical to the the hypothesis or whatever, or not hypothesis, but like to the main premise of the movie being that like a decision by a man can ruin a woman's life, like literally end her life ultimately. And like if that's going to be like the central conceit of your movie, you're essentially saying like making a narrative about how like men have oppression over women, which I don't necessarily disagree with, kind of a thing. Um, but if you want to make a movie about like female empowerment, maybe that wasn't the goal here, but it seems like it would be. How antithetical is it to have your main characters like one opportunity of escaping the depression that she's in from the loss of her friend after her friend was raped be in a relationship with a guy? Not saying that she needs to be like in a relationship with a woman, but like, can she not find any other way out of this depression cycle that she's in? And that's the one way is like a traditional storybook romance kind of a thing. Like that seems like you've kind of lost your entire narrative by like going down that route with it. And um, to me, that just feels like it wasn't really thought out beyond the central premise of like, oh, revenge thriller, like kind of like a weird revenge thriller about rape culture and things like that. But then ultimately, I need a man to make me happy kind of a thing, which is like not the message that doesn't align with the message that I would think you're trying to make with this kind of movie. That was a very poorly put way of my idea, but I think it came through.
No, it came through. It came through. Well, I mean, this is fascinating. Uh, I disagree categorically with like everything you two said. I do see where you're getting it from, and so yeah, I don't think it's unfounded or whatever. But like, okay, so I wanna let me get to the style part before I get into the substance part, because
Absolutely.
I do think the style of this movie is fucking incredible, and the composition of shots is amazing. On like almost every single level, and not every single level, but like every single shot, I just thought was so thought out in a way, and beautiful, and just perfect lighting and perfect pace and perfect, I mean everything everywhere the camera was, I was in love with. And then you get into the second half of the second half of the movie, and kind of starting with that scene with Bo Burnham's entry into the narrative where she's in that beautiful coffee shop. There is then for the rest of the movie just this, you could call it a leitmotif, but once you start looking for it, like it's everywhere. The amount of blue and pink juxtaposed on each other with shirts and lights and nail polish and earrings and like every little, to the point where it was a little bit, I mean, I think this is really this. I enjoyed watching this movie so much because it really highlighted for me what we're doing here in this podcast and why it has value. Because the first time I watched this movie, I was interested in the story and it unfolding, and all the things that made me feel. And this, when I watched it this time, I watched it with that different lens that I watch movies with when I'm going to do this type of thing. And so I really appreciated all that it gave there, and the detail it had in that kind of the blue and the pink and the boy and the girl stuff, and where it ended up getting to. So just gorgeous. But then those details really heightened it for me. So okay, the substance part. I think uh, for me, this is definitely a movie that needed to amp up every aspect. It needed to play into melodrama a little bit as a device to sort of prove its points, or express its points in a way that was not subtle. And I can see why that would be not unsavory to some, but just like not really land. Like it didn't really land with you two in terms of in terms of the main character and their motivations and what they were doing. But the things that I appreciated about the substance, and about like Carey Mulligan's character in general, Cassie's character in general, was like, I agree with you, Alex, about um, it's a little bit difficult to see trauma be portrayed as something that's so hard for a person to rise above or transcend beyond or evolve away from, whatever you want to say. And I think for me, I on the one hand, I do agree with what you're saying there in the sense of like that is tricky when it comes to like you don't want this movie to say that it's over after those type of events happen. But I think what the movie did a very good job of expressing, which led to a lot of Cassie's decisions, and just the way she was living her life before all the things happened, or not, in between the end and what kind of set it off on this path, is this idea that no one seems to give a shit, and that it's very, it's just like it's everyone is shuffling it under the rug, and I think for me that hit on, and obviously this is a movie of a time and place, right? This is smack dab in the middle of the Me Too movement, right? When this movie comes out and all those things. So like, there's also that. But um, the when your trauma is not accepted at large by the world, which I think this movie did take to the next level to sort of get there, to make sure, like it really did bludgeon you over the head with a lot of these things, which can be something that is just not that enjoyable of a watch overall. But I felt that it needed to go to that level of almost hyperbole in some of these things, to get to its point. So when the trauma is something that no one is acknowledging, kind of thing, I think that it is harder for you to get beyond it, right? Like trauma is something that you need. This is why people have groups. This is why you share. This is why you go to therapy. All those things. Like you have to get it out and have a shared experience with people, in a sense, to so that you're not on the island of trauma by yourself. And I think that this movie did a good job of, for me anyway, of teasing out that space of like, you go through these experiences, someone you love has died, no one is acknowledging that this happened, and it's really kind of just par for the course in this world that they've created. And I thought that was difficult to watch, and it made me feel like that sense of anger, when everything is just like, oh, this is, boys will be boys and locker room talk and all that stuff. And
Can I interject with a
yeah,
question?
yeah, of course. Yeah.
Um, when you talk about like people not acknowledging it and things like that, are you speaking about like her parents and trying to think like, well, yeah, like first and foremost, like do you feel like her parents fit into that category, or are you more thinking about like the dean at the school and Allison Bree's character, the old friend, quote unquote, that she meets up for drinks?
Yep. The big one for me that really crystallizes this feeling is Alison Brie's character, is the other woman who's a part of the
Uh-huh.
world and is now successful and has moved on and is married and has kids and all those things. And like their conversation where it's like, oh, all men at the end of the day like want a good girl and this and that stuff. But her also just being like, yeah, you do all these things and stuff happens and it's kind of your fault. And for me, that's really teasing out this idea in our culture of like, oh, the type of shit we've heard for a long time, like, oh, this happened to her, that's so tragic, what was she wearing? You know what I mean? Like this
Mm-hmm.
this level of it's your fault type of thing. And I think Alison Brie's character really brings that out. I also think Connie Britton's scene, as much as I agree, like there wasn't much to do there, you kind of saw what was coming. It was pretty wild, I think, what Cassie did, in that moment, to
Mm-hmm.
kidnap a young girl is crazy shit.
Yeah, that
But
really did kind of like underscore that she's like borderline sociopathic in
yeah,
her vigilanteism kind of a thing.
losing it for sure. But also, that really, for me, that is every, to quote Dave Chappelle, everything's funny until it happens to you, right? Like everything is when you bring it that close to home, and that being the only thing that really changed that Dean's whole demeanor,
Yeah.
to me, that's a nice, I think that's an important point to make, and the fact that she's a woman is also important. That like she was the person that talked to what's her friend's
Nina.
name? Nina. She's the
Nina.
person who talked to Nina, and she's just forgotten, and how like everyone has just forgotten. And I think that her being the best friend and this lifelong thing, and they're both on this huge path to being amazing doctors and all that stuff, and all the Bo Burnham conversations where Cassie was this amazing person who knew everything, top of her class, and now this is just like a world shattering event for her. That yeah, she can't really get over, and part of the reason she can't get over it is because no one will really acknowledge and kind of be with her in that moment. It's all a little bit of
See, that's where I think I almost wonder. Like, I feel like and both of us are right in our interpretation because it's our interpretation. But like, I almost get the feeling that like, because to me, I like kind of backfilled her story a little bit in my head and based on nothing. But knowing that it was her 30th birthday, this ostensibly event happened 6, 7 years ago, thinking med school in early 20s. It was further back than 5 years. It wasn't that recent. And I am not talking about like, people take years to process the death of a loved one. I'm not passing any judgment on that kind of stuff. Um, but I almost like, in my mind, I wonder how long Cassie's been in this vigilante mode where she's been going trolling men at
there's
bars.
I
there's a
mean, there
lot
are a
of
lot of
notches in that book.
tallies.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I know, but she seems to be
absolutely.
doing it like every night too. So like conceivably, like I'm curious, and again, there's no indication that I recall from the movie that you know gives us any background to fill this in. But I'm curious, did she go through like a truly depressive state when Nina died? Was she like in bed every day for hours on end, kind of a thing, for months or years? And then there was a switch that flipped or whatever. Like, to me, it would almost have been more interesting, maybe not the whole movie, but to have some part of the movie, even if it's like a retro, like a flashback, to have seen like that first moment where she went out and did her thing at the bar. Like that, like the fact that we just kind of got dropped in her being in this vigilante mode and not really getting any sort of, we understand what she's doing, like why this makes sense to her and like what justice she sees that she's getting, but never seeing her come to that idea of doing this, I think is a missed opportunity in the movie that would have made it more interesting and made her character have more depth and more empathy almost. Because like, to me, I'm just like, has she been doing this for 6 years? Has she been doing this for the last 6 months, kind of a thing? Like, where is this transition? And we get a little bit of an inkling that whatever rut she's in has been there for a while, and that's from when she brings Bo Burnham home to her parents, and then her dad says something about how we really liked him, but he said that Nina was like a daughter to us, but we've missed her, but we've really missed you. And that kind of indicates that she had been in whatever form she's in for some amount of time. But to me, that interaction she's giving to her parents could just as easily have come from a depressive state, like I just am in my own little universe, kind of a thing. I'm not entirely sure where I was going with that, but like I do really feel like that idea of seeing how she got to the person that she is when we meet her would have made her character, if not more likable, but at least more understandable, and certainly have given it more depth for me.
Yeah,
I do think I was craving, sorry to cut you off, Kyle, like
You're good.
just a little bit more from Cassie's past life before this happens. I would have liked to see, we only hear about it from other characters, how talented she was in med school, or what her personality was like back then, and how she lit up a classroom. And it happens a little bit at the end where uh, she's setting up the final torture for I'm forgetting the assaulter's name. Um,
Where am I looking?
character.
Is it Joe?
It's
Yes.
at yes.
Joe.
Yeah, well Joe is the friend. I think it's Al.
It's
Um
Al. It's Al.
Oh,
yeah,
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 Al.
Al.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
When she's like laying out her scalpel and being like, I used to be pretty good at anatomy back in med school. I wanted more gestures like that from Cassie to shade out her character a little bit more. But to your points, Kyle, I agree on the technical craft of this movie being at a really high level and that being really exciting to see as a debut film from a director. Uh, and I think it's really insightful just that observation on trauma and how trauma isolates you. And I think we see that in Cassie's story, and we see that in her revenge quest, reinforcing her her dark view of humanity because she is actively seeking out the worst possible men by creating the the Venus flytrap scenarios that she does, where she appears too drunk to stand, and then the men who approach her are going to be the ones who have predatory impulses buried beneath the surface. So she's reinforcing that alienation from humanity by going on this quest. Um, and I do like those moments of other characters really wanting to forget, wanting to brush this under the rug. I think the Alison Brie lunchtime wine drinking scene is one of the most effective ones in this movie because there's real pain and trauma that you can see in Alison Brie's performance where she's not even willing to interrogate or to take herself back to that place. She almost kind of flutters her eyes and looks really afraid to go back to that moment in time because that misogyny, that rape culture is so deeply internalized in her that the only way she can think about it is to be like, well, we were kids, we were drunk. Like, what do you expect? Stuff like that happens. I thought that was really, really effective. Um, and the
Yeah. Let me
soundtrack, to talk about other
soundtrack.
things I liked,
Yeah.
soundtrack for this movie is on point. But go for it.
Yeah, well, I just want to bring up a couple other moments that like so for one, I see what you guys are saying about you want more depth in Cassie's character. For me, Cassie's character is a little bit more of the lightning bolt that's just going through this movie. That's very, if you've either of you have watched The Wire, like there's a lot of deep, very multifaceted characters in The Wire, and then there's Marlowe, who doesn't give a flying fuck, and it's just a lightning bolt through it, making moves. Um, so for me, Carrie Mulligan's character is a little bit of that. Like she's a device to push things along, and you're on kind of the ride of what she's creating. But some of the moments that I really liked, I thought that it was a very impressive choice to have her get killed in her revenge, because I think this movie, I would probably feel exactly the same as you two feel if she just is able to execute the revenge porn. They're like, and not be killed. And I think that the reason that I like that so much is this idea. In a lot of ways, Cassie is the sacrificial lamb, obviously, of this narrative, and the idea that to talk about this stuff, this shit that goes on that happens to women all the time, there's an aspect of you have to self-sacrifice in order to get your justice. And I think that the way that Cassie's character is self-sacrificing with the nightly, whatever, bi-weekly attempts or decisions to maybe kill a guy or injure a guy in some capacity, how that's taken over her life and how that's kind of destroying her as well. The idea that she knows that she might die in trying to get what she wants and exact revenge on this guy and this group of guys, to me that's a really big, to me, the choice there really heightens this idea that in order for a woman to come forward in these events, it takes this level of courage, because you could, because of the way society operates, really be like annihilated and vilified for even being a part of that, right? Like, for you're not to blame. Getting drunk is not a crime. All those things, right? Like, to me, her dying in that way, where it's like, God damn it, like, you're right there at the cusp of this being realized, and then she loses out to just manly overpowering, is, for me, that's a very important choice, and I think something that really makes or breaks the movie. But then also, when Allison's Brie's character comes back to her and like is frantic and desperate and is so concerned about what may or may not have happened and the not knowing, I think that that's very visceral and awesome. But and expresses kind of what that moment can do to a woman, even one that's, beyond and not young and all that stuff. That it's not just something that happens to kids. But when they go in and she talks to her and there's a video and she's like, I wouldn't watch it and all this stuff. But then when that scene ends and she leaves the phone and Allison's Brie's character goes, do me a favor, never fucking contact me again. The level of hand washing that she wants from the situation, I think, doubles down on the whole isolation of this type of trauma, which is also like that Connie Britton interaction where if it's not close to home, then you just don't want to hear about it type of stuff. And then on top of that, like Molly Shannon's character about like, you just got to move on. Like, it's just not healthy. Like, we've all moved on. Like, it really sucks. That one is a more tortured moment for me because I don't see it as just like a denial, like a lot of the other people are giving Cassie's character. Um, it really is just like it's kind of like almost a helplessness of like, there's nothing we can do at some point, like we do have to move on. And I think it's interesting, the thing that you guys both sort of said or agreed on is this idea that the she finds some sort of catharsis in a relationship with a man. And I think that a lot of that is still tied up in that conversation she had with Molly Shannon, and really people trying to get her to break out of this shell. And and as much as Bo Burnham's character is not seeing that trauma, is not seeing that experience, is not like connecting those two things, he is someone that is talking, you know what I mean? Like, everyone else is just kind of like, oh, Cassie's been fucked up for a while. And Bo Burnham is like, why are you working at this coffee shop? You used to be so good. Like, he's really actually someone who's asking about her and is kind of reminding her of these things that he remembers about her that were so exemplary, trying to get her back to that state, or to that ability to think about herself in that way, or her future, and all these things. And so for me, Bo Burnham's role in this, and I do think it's very, it's a, I can still, I knew it was coming, in this time, but the first time I saw it, the gut punch of him being a part of that video, I think is very effective, and it is a huge fall from grace. And I mean, yeah, I mean, she was, she had that initial reaction when he was like, do you want to come upstairs? Which is one of those moments where you could kind of say like, well, he's not trying to bamboozle her, like he's being, you know what I mean? Like, it's obviously there can be an aspect of, geez, that's all any guy wants, and he's asking her up on the first date, and this is a little forward and all that stuff. But then there's the other thing of like, well, I don't know, we're trying to get to a world where consent is an actual thing. And her reaction to that is very aggressive, but then she kind of recovers from it and is able to, I mean, really, she's for me, that catharsis is someone trying to be with her and remind her about why she's great. And it's the only person that's trying to pull her out of, without knowing it, pull her out of the negative stuff. Like, her parents, like, aren't really doing it, right? Like, Molly Shannon's character is kind of like one of the only ones that really does that, as well. And so for me, all that is so the fact that it really gets me, the fact that she gets killed and that she kind of knows it's going to happen, because that to me is the moment of, what do you do when this happens, when no one will believe you, and or no one will take it seriously, or no one will care in the way that you want it to care. you either have to move on and whatever and forget about it, or you have like take matters into your own hands, which is kind of what she's doing in this very, over the top way for this movie. But then when she's finally, I think it's also, for me, it's also a good moment of like, she finally lets someone in. She finally is able to try to get there. And again, she's just smacked in the face with the realities of the world and the moment, and how everyone has this. I mean, not everyone, but everyone in this movie, for the most part, right, has like some sordid past and doesn't handle things well. And eh, I guess I see what you're saying in terms of some traditional character stuff that I definitely hear. But for me, there was enough moments in this movie that you can kind of, I think it's easy to say like, oh, this was very, like, I can't believe they're giving it to me this spoon fed. And I think there was a couple of those moments where I just liked more, because it seemed like from a top down look, that like self-sacrifice in coming out about these things happening requires a level of dedication to beat down the doors of people to get them to care, and they still don't care. And so the actions that she takes to get them to care, like what she does at the bar with whatever man tries to take her home and sexually assault her with Connie Britton's character, and at the end when she kind of knows that she might not come back. I mean, I think it'd be easy for the choices to be made where she doesn't leave a note, she doesn't have a grand plan, she thinks she's going to get it, she thinks she's going to win, um, and then at the end, for her to actually kind of win but have to die to get there is, yeah. I liked all of those, and I think the style for me also carries a lot of those moments and makes them better. But yeah, interesting. I mean, I had a much more visceral sit with this movie, and it really, for me, not in the cheap way, it does make me think. And I think some of the moments make me think in that second and third level way about what she has to do to get there. And then for that moment where you don't think she's going to get it, that the guys have won again, and that she's just burned and they're just going to get married and like move on, and then to have that taken away is nice. But obviously she had to die to get there. um and
Mm.
yeah, all those things. So that's kind of my read of it.
I like
That
that
is my
read
read of it.
because that it's making me, in retrospect, appreciate parts of it more that I didn't necessarily jive with in the moment. And yeah, it's nice to hear that you had such a powerful, kind of evocative experience with this movie. I do agree the ending is one of its greatest narrative kind of sleights of hand. Um, Before we pivot to Booksmart, I did want to call out another um, trick it employs, I think, is really effective. And it's a casting decision, and it's casting the characters that it does as the nice guys, where you've got Adam Brody, you've got Christopher Mintz-Plasse,
Mm-hmm.
you've got Max Greenfield, Schmidt from New Girl at the very end. So you've either got heartthrobs or lovable goofs as the nice guys, and I think that really lulls you into a false sense of security, so that when that menace does appear, it really pops and crackles. And I think that was a very smart choice to cast those actors.
Yeah, I think Bo Burnham in particular is like a masterstroke for me, because I love Bo Burnham, as you know, Alex, and maybe you don't know, Dustin, but I'm a huge Bo Burnham fan. And I actually think he will make at some point the greatest movie we've ever seen. I just think it might happen 20 years from now. But I have faith. I have faith that will happen. But yeah, like he to that point, Alex, like he is that way. And yeah, he's not involved in the act specifically. He's not the one holding the camera, but he's there. And I think that again is another one of those moments of like, the nice guys are there and they're not going to war, and so it's up to the women to do it themselves, and to do it themselves sometimes requires a level of self-sacrifice that is untenable for some, and just requires a lot to get there. And yeah, I thought I just liked all the metaphors that were contained. But yeah, I mean, we disagree. That's that's good. But also, I mean, I see what you're saying about certain aspects, and made me think about it as well. But I do love this movie. It's a movie that I will see multiple more times, but not for a bit. It'll be every couple of years type of thing, I imagine.
When you're watching
Um,
Promising Young Women, I'll be watching Little Women, so it'll be a nice
so,
pairing.
yes, it will. We can check back in. But in that, we could let's move on to Booksmart. Let's move on to slightly lighter fare from Promising Young Woman. Um, so we'd all seen Booksmart then.
Yes.
Okay.
Indeed.
What because Booksmart is a movie for me that uh I love. Now, we all know I love a coming of age tale. We all know I love all these things. But it's I think it's a movie that I think is important for the female relationship in youth that I don't think is really handled all that often. And it's interesting. I'm actually just realizing that it is something that is handled in Little Women in a way, that you get through sisterhood. But the female best friend, especially one that's gay and one that's not, and in this high school world, I just appreciated like where the journey that they went on and how kind of the message for me of the world is unfair, but be yourself through it all, and you'll actually come out ahead, type of thing. That to me is like what this movie says, and I think it's something that a lot of young girls lose. They don't have to be young, you know what I mean? Like this idea of not being yourself, or not being true to yourself, or not having your goals or whatever, and getting lost in the sauce of a high school or an adolescence, and letting the way other people are impede how you want to feel about yourself or what you're trying to do. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an incredibly enjoyable watch, and I think one of the things that it does incredibly well is the way that it uses the songs that it chooses to heighten certain scenes that are usually inside someone's head about things that happen in high school. For me, that's very emblematic of how music can operate in a high schooler's mind, in a way that, to juxtapose this obviously with Superbad. I think it's a very different movie, and I think it's saying different things. Uh, and the musical choices in Superbad are very classic, and they're a little bit more about the making of the movie. And I feel like the musical choices that go along with certain scenes are very much inside a 17, 18-year old's head, where the music of the time is being superimposed on their life to give it this huge amount of grandeur that puts on this massive amount of pressure. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's so many moments, but I think the moment that I like the most in this movie is when they're fighting at the party and you lose all of their words. And I think I don't know, something about the way that scene has like entropy when you take away the sound, after the huge kind of reversal baptism moment of her jumping into the pool, which is, the trope or the device that is used in so many movies for like some new realization of becoming. But this way, she jumps in thinking that she's got this moment with this girl, and then it turns out that all of their reality is imploding on itself when Nick and Ryan are actually making out, and she's trying to protect, and they all fall apart, and they have to come back together. For me, it just like, God, the whole everything, the pacing, the dialogue, the characters, the principal that's the Uber driver, the teacher that still wants to be young and like is involved with their life. Like it's a very, I don't know, what's his character, what's the rich guy's character's name? Jer Bear. Oh
Is it
man.
is it oh shit. Is it yeah, it's Jared. Yeah, Jared.
Jared, yeah,
Jared
yeah.
Bear.
I
Yeah.
think his, like he's something that is very much like a comedic relief, but then that spins into that one great conversation that they have, which reminds me a little bit of like Can't Hardly Wait, when
Mm-hmm.
they're locked in the bathroom and they eventually, come to understand that they're not so different and all those things. Yeah. I love it so much, and I just think it's a story that we don't get enough of in a real way, like this, with these two types of characters that are not just, pretty mean girls, I guess, for lack of a better term, but have
Yeah.
real. Like, I knew so many of these types of women in my young academic life, of just, very driven, uh, and but still try to figure it out, in the world, and then just like, I have a thing for movies that are about friendship as well, and just that level of best friendness is, which I think is also something I really liked about Promising Young Woman, that was affecting. Like, I could see the loss of a best friend like that in that way, being that effective. And I like seeing friendship on screen that is this quirky and this weird and, this powerful. That's what I got. That's what I got. What do you got?
Alex, do you
Who
want to
wants to
go or you
talk?
want me to go?
Yeah, let me jump into it. I mean, I really really like this movie. I think it's a blast. I think it moves along at a really nice steady clip. That sequence that you were talking about, Kyle, that starts in the pool with Amy and Ryan, and then kind of ends with Amy and Molly having that big blow up fight, and then as you talked about, you've got that great choice to cut out the audio, and we know exactly what they're fucking saying. Like, we don't need to
Mm-hmm.
hear the audio to know what the tenor, what the emotional climate of the argument is. I also love the detail where you have the little flash bulbs on everyone's smartphone activated, so you know that this moment is not just this private internal thing. It is being, fucking turned into Insta stories and reels and streamed to, the entire student body. So it really heightens the drama there. Um, for me, what stood out about this movie is the way that it kind of recontextualizes and puts a fresh spin on a lot of high school movie tropes, um, where even in the beginning when you get that first scene where they're dancing to the music kind of as Molly is picking Amy up from her apartment. um and it's similar to a lot of scenes like that you get in high school comedies. It's that, like, you know do you want to be a gangster type, like you've got the hip hop playing, you've got the characters thinking they're all cool, the slow mo is playing. But in this, Olivia Wilde makes a really smart choice to, for just one cut, you get this wide shot of how fucking goofy they look when they're actually dancing. You don't get the
Yep.
heightened reality of what they think they look like in their minds. You get like the real dorky shit, and I think that's great. Um, I think what kept me from connecting with this movie until they get to the party, because that's really where it all clicked. And narratively, thematically, that makes sense. But a couple things kind of kept me at arm's length for maybe the first half, two-thirds of the running time. One is that some of the characters just felt a little cartoonish. Where, like, yes, this is a broad comedy. Um, these are exaggerated types of people you would find in a real high school. Um, and that's one of the tricks the movie pulls, is it adds shading to these characters as time goes on. Like you were saying, Kyle, with Jared, where we initially see him and he's this kind of cringy, try hard rich kid who thinks he can buy friendship. And then you get that dimension and shading when him and Molly have that great conversation at the party, and you're like, oh, there is depth. Like, he desires things. Like, he has, um, he has real texture as a character. He's not this cartoon character, comic relief. Um, I think the movie pulls a similar trick with Molly, where I think you're supposed to find her ingratiating. You're supposed to, not ingratiating,
Grading.
annoying,
Yeah.
grating. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're supposed to find her grating because she reminds you of all of the Lisa Simpson types who, everyone went to high school and college with, who are so desperate to prove their intellect and their, superiority. And she's at her best when you get those moments of weakness, of vulnerability. Um, but I wish the movie had brought me in a little bit sooner. Um, and I also think that some of those set pieces in getting to the party felt a little contrived. As much as I like Jason um,
Sudeikis.
Sudeikis, Sudeikis,
Sudeikis.
Yeah.
yeah, and like as much as I was cracking up at the Uber scene, it felt a little derivative. It was like, okay, I've seen this before. Um, Similarly with the drama um, drama party, and then the acid trip scene, which I fucking love on a filmmaking level, because I love that stop motion sequence where
Yeah.
uh, where they turn into Barbie dolls, and they're talking about the weird anatomy of the Barbie dolls, and it's such a great visualization of two teenagers on an acid trip. But scenes like that just felt um, too much like they were giving these arbitrary hurdles for them to overcome on the way to the party. Um, and luckily, once we get to the party, it all clicked for me. Uh, Probably with that scene that you were describing, Kyle. That really great virtuoso kind of single take that starts in the pool, ends with the fight. Just great shit. Um, and I like the way it ends. I like that they do both go their separate ways, and it's just got a great last scene where you think she's dropping her off at the airport, and it's like, do you want to get fucking pancakes or whatever? And it's just a great comedy beat, and it's a great friendship beat, to your point, Kyle, about wanting to extend those moments that you have with a close friend where you're not going to see each other for a long period of time, and you're really trying to elongate that interaction. um, yeah, I really liked this, even with those caveats I mentioned. Dustin, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of echo a lot of things both of you said, so I don't want to like. I know we're kind of nearing our typical time limit for these. I think for me, the two things that, or three things that like really elevate this movie to me, like I think about Super Bad and how much I love that movie coming out, and I don't disagree with you, Kyle, that like these are two very different movies in how they go about conveying their message and things like that and telling their stories. But you can't not compare them because
Yeah.
in no matter what, they're very complementary to each other. And like I think Superbad came out in 2007, so I was already 2 years into college when that came out. But it still feels like, oh, that's my generation's like two high school quote unquote losers, trying to like party at the end of high school movie. But I like this one so much better. I mean, I do. Superbad has a soft spot for me, but it also feels like a lot of those Judd Apatow movies from like the 2000s like haven't aged very well necessarily, and I feel like whenever I go back and revisit it, I'll be like, oh yeah, this is fine, whatever. But like this movie to me, like, and Superbad doesn't really do this too much, but like I've always struggled with and I think we've talked about this on the podcast with like coming of age movies in high school where you're typically almost always following a like the loner or the loser kid, the geek, and they're getting bullied and things like that. And like I was a geek in high school, I never really got bullied. This movie feels like an extension of kind of my high school experience in a way where I don't think I ever had that moment that they have where they show up at the party at the end and they're like everybody's like super happy to see them. All these people that they had built up as these people they never wanted, like that never wanted anything to do with them, and they never wanted anything to do with these people. And they get there, and everybody's like, "Oh shit, you're here! This is awesome! Like this is the coolest thing!" And it's not just like a um, a initial like welcome, like they kind of see it through, and even uh, the vice president that Molly's into, that doesn't pan out, but he engages with her at a certain level beyond what she well expected, kind of a thing.
Hmm.
I never had that kind of moment with like the popular people in high school, but I do feel like the moments that I like ran into them outside of school or whatever, like it was a much nicer kind of relationship than I expected or whatever, like a nicer exchange, whatever. And so like I appreciate that this movie like didn't put any effort into like, oh yeah, but there's this one like real bully who's really a dick kind of a thing. And we just like I'm glad that trope wasn't in here. I love Caitlin Dever as an actress. Like she's phenomenal. Have either of you watched Justified before?
No.
With I forget what his name is, but anyways, like fantastic TV show, and that was where she got her like one of her first big starts when she was really young, and she was phenomenal in that. And I feel like there's a moment early on when after Molly has like her breakdown in school when she realizes all these kids are going to like big schools, and her and Molly are like at the top of like a hill or whatever, and uh, her and what is Caitlin? Why am I blanking? Molly and
Amy.
Amy are at the top of a hill, and Molly hasn't said anything, and Caitlin's like, or Amy's playing a guitar about like, oh, if you're not gonna like, I was laughing so hard at that sequence.
Yeah.
And so like that performance I think is fantastic. I love the score, like the score and the soundtrack to this like all really works. There's some great like kind of needle drops as you both talked about. And I mean I hear what you're saying, Alex, about like a lot of the periphery like characters feeling somewhat cartoonish. I mean I think the obvious example of that is like Gigi being like this weird like manic pixie dream girl kind of a thing. um, but I think, and you kind of alluded to this, reading between the, oh, I just noticed that this calendar on my wall has October spelled with two O's at the beginning of it. Funny.
Incredible.
So, um, here, you guys can see it too. Look at this. Two O's.
Ooktober.
Okay.
Ooktober. My friend that gave that to me like works for the company that prints it, so I'm gonna have to text her and tell her that.
Yeah, definitely.
But well, oh shit, now I lost. Oh, I think that like them being like these cartoonic, that's not a word, cartoony monoliths that Amy and Molly more specifically have kind of painted in their narrative of these are my classmates in school, and Devin is the rich guy that, and we see it playing out, but he's like the rich guy who thinks he's like hot shit. The two theater kids, I mean we don't really get much more depth to them, but like the two theater kids are who they are. Gigi's who she is. The vice president is like this party guy kind of a thing. Like we're seeing these characters through their lens of experience, and then once we get to the party, we get to see a little more depth to each of these characters beyond the superficiality that like Molly and Amy had kind of painted them with. And so I think that was somewhat deliberate, but like also another way of looking at it is, and this lines up with the hallucination scene when they're both Barbie dolls, is like it is meant to be goofy, it is meant to be kind of cartoony, kind of slightly above reality but not like fantasy kind of a thing. And so like I just think it's like it's fun. I am grateful that we are at a point where a movie like this can be made where one of the main characters is gay and already came out, and we're like it's not, it's like the newest Spider-Man movies where we're not, in the newer Batman movies where we're not seeing the freaking origin story anymore. Like where sometimes I'm happy to be past a point where like the crux of a narrative in a coming of age movie has to be the character's anxiety over coming out. Not that that's still valid and or isn't valid anymore. It totally is. But I like that this story is just like, oh, she's coming out, and what we're looking at more is like, oh, she has a huge crush on this girl, and like that up and down, and then she makes it with another girl that she didn't even know that she had a crush
Yeah.
on, kind of thing. Like,
I mean,
I
that was a
thought,
nice choice that Amy gets the hookup narrative, not Molly.
yeah, yeah. So like, I love that. I love the fact that the two theater kids like are just, you know, flamboyant as hell and like just accepted, and they're like, that's just who they are, their personalities. Like, I I feel like this is a movie that makes me wish that this was the high school I went to. Not that my high school experience was traumatic or it was more boring than anything. And like, this seems like a, maybe it's unrealistic because I don't know how the fuck high school has been for the last 20 years. But seems like a pretty ultimately positive high school environment to be in. And realistic or not, like, I like seeing that on screen, and I like that there's really no like um there's no like villain in this movie, which I think is even a minor villain inconsequential to the story. There is none.
Right. I mean,
Short
like,
of the pizza delivery guy that's the serial killer, he's the villain in this movie.
Yeah.
totally. But yeah, even like the jock character who like would usually be the villain is a really nice guy, the vice president, and he's genuinely attracted to Molly, and like they have a really nice rapport, and that was, yeah, very heartwarming to see. And I totally agree about seeing this and being like, "Oh, that this seems like a nice high school experience," because that's one of the big themes, right? Is that this stratification that we think happens and is such a core part of the high school experience, where you got your nerds, you got your people who are academically successful, you got your burnouts. And this movie is saying like those divisions don't really exist anymore, or at least in the context of this story. That's part of the big reveal that sets this whole plot into motion, is Molly's realization that, oh, these people who I thought were, you know, fucking off and not caring about school are actually academic high performers just like me. So I thought that was really refreshing to see, and makes me, yeah, like both of you are saying, makes me excited to see this. And I think it's one of those high school movies that's going to be um, just part of the rotation when you want a good feel good story like this.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
absolutely.
this is a movie that I want to show like my nephew when they're 16, 17, 18, or whatever. And yeah, it's interesting to have a movie that certainly has love interests that are around, but not truly make or break, more like pushing the
No,
movie forward. You know what I mean?
that's
And there, like we said, there isn't a villain, so we have a movie that doesn't really have a huge villain and doesn't really have like a, oh my god, this love interest is everything to me, you know what I mean,
yeah,
type of stuff. And I think that in and of itself is like kind of an accomplishment to make an entertaining movie without those two elements. And I do like the way that they set everyone up as these, like we said, cartoonish others that are, oh, they're the popular kids, they're the cool kids, they're the kids that are doing whatever they want and are not going to make it in life. And then how from the scene in the bathroom when she overhears them talking shit about her, Molly overhears them, and how they all, like we've said, get this level of depth throughout, whether it's through like big one-on-one conversations with emotional vulnerability or just through the casual stuff, like when they're playing beer pong, you know what I mean, when Molly and Nick are playing
mhm.
beer pong and stuff like that. Like there's and I kind of like how this end of high school involves Jason Sudeikis and the teacher. I can't remember her name now, but how they are also like, there's this rising of, oh, we're all leaving this weird thing of high school and we are all actually human beings, and it's going to be complicated and messy throughout, but there's no longer this, we're kids and they're adults, and then the adults are also lowering themselves with having to do, they're coming into the high schoolers world with wanting to be involved in their lives or having to work a second job or whatever. And that being, I don't know, I liked how it kind of got together. And then yeah, at the end there is, she
Yeah,
has
that's
that,
nice.
she gets a number of the girl that she threw up on, which is shocking and amazing. But even that's like that's not the end of the movie. There's not like, oh, what are you going to call it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to Africa for a year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Well, and I
um,
love the fact that, both when they get to the party, both of their crushes, the ruinous moment for each of them at the party is both of their crushes making out with each other, which they see at different times. But the fact that, like, by the next morning, like, neither of them even mention that, the fact that they realized as characters that, like, yeah, that sucked. That sucked in that moment big time, but that's not the end of the world. That's not, my entire existence is not crumbling or anything like that. For Amy, it seemed like it was a big win in the big picture kind of a thing. And Molly just is like, yeah, like that sucks, but it is what it is kind of a thing. Um, I appreciated the fact that like you had said, Kyle, like that those crushes and those love interests kind of thing wasn't a linchpin of the story and of these character arcs. Like it was part of it, it was the reason that Amy wanted to, or not even really why they wanted to go to the party, but something they both wanted to accomplish at the party. But it was largely inconsequential. And I think, I mean, altruistically, that's a great message for kids and everything, but also it's just, yeah, it's another example of them kind of like shirking stereotypes for coming of age high school movies like this, where the crush is a huge piece of like the story that's being told. And here it's like, yeah, like your high school crush is very unlikely to be anything beyond a crush.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I enjoyed it thoroughly on this watch, and I'll watch it many more times, I'm sure. All right, well, let's get on to some rankings. Let's wrap it up. Alex, what do you got here? Or do we have more? I don't want to miss
No.
anything.
No,
No.
Okay,
no.
Alex.
Let's get into some rankings. So I think number 3 is going to be Promising Young Women. Number 2 is going to be Booksmart, and number 1 is going to be Little Women for me. No surprises here. Dustin, what about you?
Yeah, 3 is Promising Young Women. I think two and one are pretty tightly tied here, but I'd have to say Little Women for two, and then Booksmart for one, because I feel like Booksmart is just like the most rewatchable of these three for me, and like that's the one I can see going back to the most. I'm sure I'll rewatch Little Women at some point, or if my wife is watching it, I'll be fine watching it. But Booksmart, I can see myself. I'm disappointed it took me so long since seeing it in the theater to rewatch it because I enjoyed it thoroughly rewatching it.
Hey, well, that's why we're doing the pod, baby. That's good. I'm glad I got you to
Mm-hmm.
do that. Yeah, for me, 3 is Little Women, and 2 and 1 is it really is like a what am I ranking on, right? Because I agree, like the rewatchability of Booksmart, the amount of times I've watched it, the amount of times I know I'm going to watch it, is is a factor. Promising Young Woman, though, I think I'm going to put Booksmart 2 and Promising Young Woman 1. And I think I'm going to put
Nice.
Promising Young Woman 1 because it's a movie that if I start it, and let's say I started at 12 midnight and I fall asleep and I wake up, I'm going to finish it the next day at some point. I'm going to like find where I was and finish it. And Booksmart is something that like, oh, I could put on for 25 minutes and walk away from and be like, oh, I don't know, that was wonderful 25 minutes and now we've moved on. Much like their crushes. And so there's something, and there's also like I want to share Booksmart with people in a way that's like fun. But it's not, there's a level of sharing that I want to do with Promising Young Woman, and the style of Booksmart's great. It's well shot. It's all the director and editor and all that stuff is, I think, wonderfully done. But there are choices made in Promising Young Woman that I just soak up as like a film person that for me are just candy, amid all the horror that's going on. So yeah, I'm gonna go Promising Young Woman 1.
Awesome. Well, we'll wrap up the episode there, and we'll hope you tune in next week.
Great
Yes,
talk, y'all.
indeed.